In the early hours of June 6, 1944, the sky over northern France filled with the deep roar of hundreds of C-47 transport planes. The night was cold and moonlit, with low clouds rolling inland from the English Channel. Below, the fields and villages of Normandy lay quiet. German sentries stood watch along roads and bridges, unaware that the largest airborne assault in history was about to descend on them. Inside the planes, paratroopers waited in silence. They were men of the U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions and the British 6th Airborne Division. Their mission was clear: jump behind German lines, seize key bridges and crossroads, and disrupt enemy movements before the amphibious landings began at dawn. These airborne troops were the first wave of Operation Overlord, known to history as D-Day. Each man carried about 80 pounds of gear, including rifles, grenades, and demolition charges. They had trained for months, but no amount of training could prepare them for what lay ahead. As the planes crossed the coastline, German searchlights probed the sky. The sound of flak cannons grew louder. Black bursts of anti-aircraft fire exploded around the formations. Pilots struggled to hold their course in the darkness while avoiding the deadly barrage. Pathfinders, who had jumped earlier to mark the drop zones with signal lights, often missed their marks due to poor weather and enemy fire. This caused confusion that would scatter many paratroopers far from their intended landing sites. The red light inside each plane switched to green. Jumpmasters shouted for the men to stand and hook up their static lines. One by one, the paratroopers moved to the door, the cold night air rushing in. With a final slap on the shoulder, each man leapt into the blackness. Parachutes snapped open above the fields and marshes below, glowing faintly as the moonlight caught the silk. Some men floated silently down, while others heard bullets whipping past them as German troops fired from the ground. Many paratroopers landed off course. Some dropped into flooded fields and sank under the weight of their equipment before they could cut free. Others landed in trees or on rooftops. Scattered groups used small metal clickers, known as crickets, to identify each other in the dark. 2 clicks meant a friendly, 1 meant a challenge. The sound of these clicks carried through hedgerows and narrow lanes as isolated squads tried to regroup. Small fights broke out almost immediately. In some villages, German defenders were caught completely by surprise. Sentries were overpowered before they could raise an alarm. In other places, the Germans reacted quickly, setting up roadblocks and ambushes. For the paratroopers, every encounter was chaotic and close range. They had to move fast, capture key objectives, and then hold out until reinforcements arrived from the beaches. One of the most daring actions of the night came when British glider troops of the 6th Airborne Division landed near the Orne River. Their target was Pegasus Bridge, a vital crossing needed to secure the eastern flank of the invasion. The gliders came in silently, skimming low over the fields. When they landed, troops stormed the bridge and seized it before German forces could blow it up. This action kept German armor from reaching the beaches later that morning. Elsewhere, American paratroopers faced different challenges. Units of the 101st Airborne worked to capture causeways leading inland from Utah Beach. These narrow routes crossed flooded areas and were essential for moving vehicles and supplies. The 82nd Airborne fought for control of crossroads and towns like Saint-Mire-Église. In this town, a dramatic scene unfolded when paratroopers descended right into the center of the village as German soldiers fired at them. One man, paratrooper John Steele, became famous after his parachute caught on the church steeple, leaving him hanging above the square. From the German perspective, the night brought confusion and fear. Reports of parachutes came in from many different areas. Commanders at first thought these might be small raids or diversions. They did not realize the scale of the assault. Communication lines were cut by Allied sabotage, and radio messages were unclear. Some German units received no orders for hours. Others waited for confirmation before moving, losing precious time. General Erwin Rommel, who was responsible for defending northern France, was not even in the area that night, leaving lower-level officers to make critical decisions on their own. For German soldiers on the ground, the experience was overwhelming. Many were young conscripts or older men stationed in rear-area garrisons. They suddenly found themselves under attack by highly trained paratroopers. Villages erupted in gunfire and confusion. Civilians woke to the sounds of battle and saw parachutes scattered across their fields. Some local French villagers risked their lives to help the paratroopers, guiding them through the hedgerows or hiding wounded men in barns and cellars. Others stayed silent, fearing German reprisals. As dawn approached, small groups of paratroopers began to link up. Though scattered and under strength, they had achieved many of their goals. Bridges were held, key roads were blocked, and German reinforcements were delayed. By the time the first waves of infantry stormed the beaches at dawn, the Germans were still struggling to understand the full scope of the invasion. The airborne assault came at a high cost. Many men were killed or wounded before they even reached the ground. Others were captured while fighting in isolated pockets. Yet their actions shaped the course of D-Day. By cutting roads, seizing crossings, and sowing confusion, the paratroopers helped secure the success of the landings. Without their efforts, German armored divisions might have reached the beaches quickly and thrown the invasion back into the sea. The events of that night were marked by chaos, bravery, and rapid decision-making. Paratroopers often had to rely on instinct and improvisation. German commanders faced the challenge of reacting to an enemy that seemed to appear everywhere at once. Villagers found themselves caught between two powerful armies, making choices that could mean life or death. When daylight finally revealed the scale of the operation, the Germans were stunned. What had begun as scattered reports of enemy activity turned out to be part of a massive, coordinated attack. The paratroopers behind their lines were only the beginning. Soon, the full weight of the Allied invasion would come crashing ashore. The airborne assault over Normandy on June 6, 1944, was one of the most complex military operations ever attempted. It was planned months in advance under the codename Neptune, the airborne component of the larger Operation Overlord. The goal was to place thousands of Allied soldiers deep behind German lines before the main amphibious landings took place at dawn. These men would cut roads, seize bridges, and hold key points to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. The operation involved over 23,000 paratroopers dropped in multiple waves. The first wave consisted of pathfinders, small groups of specially trained soldiers who jumped ahead of the main force. Their job was to locate the designated landing zones and set up signal beacons to guide the transport planes coming in behind them. In theory, this would allow the paratroopers to land in precise locations, ready to carry out their missions. In practice, darkness, low clouds, and heavy anti-aircraft fire scattered many of these pathfinders, leaving some drop zones unmarked and confusing pilots as they approached their targets. The planes used for the operation were primarily C-47 Dakotas, workhorse transport aircraft that had been modified to carry paratroopers and tow gliders. Each C-47 carried around 15 to 20 men. The interior was stripped down to basic benches and anchor points for static lines. The jumpers were packed in tightly, their heavy gear making the small space even more cramped. When the green light came on, they would stand, hook up their static lines, and exit one by one into the dark sky. Gliders were another key element of the plan. Unlike powered aircraft, these wooden, engineless craft were towed across the channel by C-47s and then released to glide silently to their landing zones. Gliders carried equipment too heavy to be dropped by parachute, including jeeps, artillery pieces, and even small tanks. Landing a glider was dangerous. Pilots had to navigate in darkness and put down on small fields often bordered by hedgerows, ditches, or stone walls. Many gliders broke apart on impact, but if they reached their targets intact, they gave the airborne units badly needed firepower and mobility. The paratroopers themselves carried weapons and equipment designed for close combat and rapid movement. Standard rifles included the M1 Garand and the M1 carbine. Some men carried Thompson submachine guns or light machine guns like the Browning automatic rifle. In addition to their weapons, each man carried grenades, demolition charges, and a small shovel for digging in. Their uniforms were specially designed with extra pockets for gear and reinforced knees and elbows for rough landings. The total weight of a paratrooper's gear often exceeded 80 pounds, which made the jump physically demanding and dangerous. Because the paratroopers would be scattered in the dark, identification was a major concern. To avoid friendly fire, the U.S. Airborne divisions issued small metal clickers known as crickets. 2 clicks in quick succession meant a friendly signal, while 1 click was a challenge. This simple system allowed men to find each other in the hedgerows and villages without giving away their positions with spoken words. It also helped them regroup quickly after the chaos of the drop. The Germans defending Normandy were part of the 7th Army, a force stretched thin across a wide area. Their defensive plans focused heavily on the coastline itself, where they expected the main Allied landings to occur. The beaches were fortified with bunkers, minefields, and artillery positions. Inland, however, the defenses were far weaker. Villages and crossroads were held by small garrisons, often made up of older soldiers or conscripts from occupied countries. Many of these troops lacked combat experience and were not prepared for a sudden, large-scale airborne assault. German anti-aircraft batteries posed the greatest threat to the incoming transport planes. These batteries were scattered throughout the region and included both heavy guns and rapid-firing cannons. As the C-47s approached, they faced a wall of flak that forced many pilots to take evasive action. Some planes were shot down outright, while others veered off course in the confusion. This disrupted the carefully planned formations and led to widespread scattering of the paratroopers. Another problem for the Germans was communication. Telephone lines connected many command posts, but these lines were vulnerable to sabotage. The paratroopers carried wire cutters and demolition charges specifically to cut these lines as soon as they landed. Radio communication was unreliable, especially at night and under combat conditions. This meant that German commanders often received only fragments of information about what was happening. Reports of parachutes came in from multiple locations, creating the impression of enemy forces everywhere. The terrain of Normandy added to the complexity of the operation. The region was known for its bocage, a patchwork of small fields bordered by tall hedgerows. These natural barriers made navigation difficult and provided excellent cover for ambushes. Pilots had to identify drop zones using only brief glimpses through the clouds and darkness. Once on the ground, paratroopers moved through narrow lanes and thick hedges, often unable to see more than a few yards ahead. This environment favored small unit actions and required constant coordination to avoid friendly fire. For the airborne units, timing was critical. Their actions were designed to support the seaborne landings, which would begin a few hours later. If they failed to capture bridges or block roads, German reinforcements could reach the beaches and throw the invasion back into the sea. To prevent this, missions were carefully sequenced. Pathfinders went first, followed by main assault waves, and finally glider reinforcements carrying heavier equipment. Each step depended on the success of the one before it. In the hours leading up to the jump, commanders reviewed maps and briefed their men on specific objectives. Some units were tasked with holding key bridges until relieved by troops coming inland from the beaches. Others were assigned to destroy enemy positions or block road networks. Every objective was part of a larger plan to disrupt German command and control. The complexity of the operation required precise coordination, but planners knew that, in the fog of war, much would come down to individual initiative on the ground. As the first paratroopers leapt from their planes, the technical planning collided with the unpredictable reality of combat. Poor weather, enemy fire, and the inherent challenges of nighttime airborne operations created chaos almost immediately. Pilots struggled to keep formation under heavy flak, and some dropped their sticks of paratroopers miles from their intended zones. Gliders crashed into fields or hedgerows, breaking apart on landing. Yet despite these setbacks, the airborne troops pressed forward. The combination of careful preparation, specialized equipment, and sheer determination allowed them to carry out their mission. Their success depended not just on the strength of their numbers, but on the detailed mechanics of the operation, every signal beacon, every piece of gear, and every time jump playing a role in the larger plan to open the way for the Allied invasion. The night sky over Normandy was alive with noise and fire. Allied transport planes pushed forward through a wall of anti-aircraft fire. Searchlights stabbed upward, sweeping across the clouds, while black bursts of flak exploded around the formations. Pilots tried to hold course, but visibility was poor, and enemy fire forced them into sudden, sharp maneuvers. In the cramped cabins, Paratroopers clutched their static lines, feeling the planes lurch under them. The moment the green light flashed, men leapt into the darkness, trusting their parachutes and their training. From the first jumps, the plan began to unravel. The wind scattered sticks of paratroopers far beyond their assigned zones. Some men drifted miles off course before their boots touched the ground. Flooded fields, created by German engineers who had opened river locks, swallowed others. Weighted down by gear, many drowned before they could cut themselves free. In some areas, entire squads were lost before firing a shot. The drops that did land correctly often faced immediate German resistance, as sentries and machine gun nests opened fire on the descending men. When the paratroopers reached the ground, they found themselves scattered and alone. In the dark, every hedgerow and shadow could hide the enemy. The countryside was a maze of small fields bordered by high, thick hedges. Visibility was only a few yards at most. Soldiers who landed together quickly regrouped. Those who landed alone used clickers to signal for friendlies. 2 sharp clicks in the night meant safety. 1 click meant a challenge. These simple sounds, barely louder than a whisper, allowed men to link up without revealing their positions. Small groups began to form, often made up of men from different units. Rank mattered less than action. Whoever had the clearest sense of direction took the lead. These groups moved quickly, carrying out their missions in pieces. A handful of men might cut a telephone line, severing German communications to an entire sector. Others ambushed a passing patrol, seizing maps and supplies. Bridges became focal points. A bridge intact meant German reinforcements could move quickly. A bridge destroyed or captured meant delay and confusion. The most famous of these actions took place at Pegasus Bridge. Just after midnight, British gliders of the 6th Airborne Division came in low and silent over the fields. The pilots released at the last moment, skimming just above the hedgerows. When the gliders slammed into the landing zones, the troops inside leapt out and charged straight for the bridge. German defenders were caught off guard. Within minutes, the bridge was under Allied control. This single action secured the eastern flank of the invasion and blocked German armor from moving against the beaches at dawn. Elsewhere, the fight was more chaotic. American paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions worked to seize causeways leading inland from Utah Beach. These narrow roads crossed flooded lowlands and were the only paths tanks and trucks could take. German troops defending the causeways fought fiercely, knowing their loss would open the way for Allied forces from the beach. Some paratroopers never reached their assigned objectives. Instead, they improvised, striking German positions wherever they could. One squad might destroy a key bridge by dawn. Another might set up a roadblock and hold off enemy vehicles until overwhelmed. German units struggled to respond. Reports of parachutes came in from dozens of locations. Some commanders believed they were facing small commando raids meant to distract from a main attack elsewhere. Others thought this was the beginning of a full-scale invasion, but they lacked clear orders. Radio messages were garbled or lost altogether. Telephone lines had been cut in multiple places. Units acted on their own, often without coordination. For German soldiers in the villages and fields, the night was terrifying. The enemy seemed to appear out of nowhere. A quiet lane one moment might erupt in gunfire the next. Convoys moving toward the coast were ambushed. Patrols disappeared. At St. Mire-Église, paratroopers landed directly in the town square, surprising both defenders and civilians. Fighting raged through the narrow streets as more paratroopers dropped into the area, some landing on rooftops and even on the church itself. General Erwin Rommel, the German commander responsible for defending northern France, was away visiting his wife in Germany that night. His absence left senior officers uncertain how to respond. They had strict orders not to move armored reserves without direct approval from Hitler himself. Hitler, asleep at his headquarters, was not woken for hours. By the time approval came, the situation had already shifted. Confusion and delay prevented German armor from reaching the beaches in time to mount a decisive counterattack. While the Germans hesitated, the paratroopers pressed their advantage. They moved in small, fast groups, striking and vanishing before larger German forces could react. Bridges were seized intact, crossroads blocked, and key positions destroyed. These actions forced the Germans to fight on scattered fronts, slowing their ability to organize. The night was filled with scenes of desperate combat. A lone machine gun might hold up a squad until a grenade ended the fight. A farmhouse could serve as a strong point until set ablaze by tracer rounds. Villages shifted hands repeatedly as both sides fought for control. In the darkness, friend and foe often fired at shadows, unsure of who was who. As dawn approached, the scale of the operation became clearer. From scattered squads and improvised attacks, a loose network of Allied control began to form. The paratroopers had taken heavy losses, but they held key ground. German forces remained disorganized, with some units retreating and others still waiting for orders. The roads to the beaches were choked with wrecked vehicles and abandoned equipment. The tactical success of the airborne troops came not from perfect execution but from relentless action. Even when dropped far off course, they created disruption and fear. Each isolated fight slowed the German response. Each destroyed bridge or ambushed convoy added to the confusion. By the time the first Allied infantry began landing on the beaches, the Germans were still trying to understand what had happened during the night. The hours after the drop were marked by constant movement and decision-making under pressure. Leaders on both sides faced incomplete information and shifting circumstances. For the paratroopers, survival and mission blended into one task: move forward, strike the enemy, and hold until help arrived. For the Germans, the challenge was to piece together a coherent defense from fragments. The outcome of these struggles would shape the battles to come as daylight revealed the full scope of the Allied invasion. The men of the airborne divisions waited in silence as their planes crossed the dark waters of the English Channel. The engines droned steadily, but inside each C-47 the only sounds were breathing and the rustle of gear. The paratroopers were young, many still in their early 20s. Some gripped their rifles tightly. Others closed their eyes, knowing the next few hours could be their last. When the red light glowed, they rose to their feet and hooked up their static lines. The moment the green light flashed, they moved toward the door, one after another, until they vanished into the cold night sky. For a few seconds, there was only the rush of wind and the feeling of falling. Then parachutes opened with sharp jolts. Men swung beneath the canopies, looking down at a patchwork of fields and villages dimly lit by moonlight. Tracers streaked past as German machine guns fired from the ground. The air was filled with shouts, gunfire, and explosions from flak shells bursting above them. Some men saw other parachutes torn apart by bullets. Others hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Many paratroopers landed alone, far from their units. In the darkness, every shadow seemed dangerous. The fields were broken by tall hedgerows that blocked sight and sound. A man might crawl through a gap in the hedge only to find himself face to face with the enemy. Some used their clickers, producing 2 quick clicks to signal for friendly forces. A single click was a challenge, answered by 2 in return. The tiny sound carried through the night like a lifeline. Fear was constant, but training took over. Small groups formed wherever men could find each other. Rank mattered less than action. Whoever knew the terrain or had a clear idea of their objective gave the orders. These groups moved carefully, often unsure of where they were. They relied on memory, compass bearings, and the faint outlines of landmarks. Every encounter was a test of nerve. A barn might hold frightened livestock, or it might hide German soldiers waiting in ambush. Some paratroopers never found their units at all. They fought as isolated squads or even as individuals, striking where they could. A single soldier might destroy a bridge with demolition charges or ambush a convoy from a roadside ditch. These actions were not part of the original plan, but they created confusion and fear among the defenders. For the men on the ground, the night became a series of brief, violent clashes followed by tense silence. For many, the greatest relief came when they finally linked up with other groups. After hours of fighting alone, to see familiar faces and hear familiar voices was overwhelming. Men embraced or clapped each other on the back, knowing they had survived the first part of the mission. Together, they felt stronger and ready to press on toward their objectives. On the German side, The experience was just as intense, but from the opposite perspective. Sentries stationed in quiet villages were the first to notice strange shapes falling from the sky. At first, they thought they were seeing things. Then the shooting started. Paratroopers appeared suddenly in the fields and streets, their movements quick and purposeful. German soldiers scrambled to grab weapons and man positions, but many were overrun before they could organize a defense. Some defenders fought hard, setting up machine guns and ambushes. Others panicked and fled when confronted with aggressive, determined attackers. Many German units were made up of older men or conscripts from occupied countries who had little desire to fight to the death. The suddenness of the attack broke their morale. Communications collapsed almost immediately. Telephone lines were cut in multiple places. Radios were unreliable, their signals drowned out by static and interference. Commanders received fragmentary reports of parachutes landing across a wide area. Some believed they were facing thousands of enemy troops. Others thought it was a diversion to draw attention away from another sector. Without clear information, orders were delayed or contradictory. German soldiers who survived the first encounters were left confused and frustrated. They expected reinforcements or clear instructions that never came. In some areas, they waited for hours without knowing whether to defend, retreat, or counterattack. The lack of coordination gave the Allied paratroopers freedom to move and strike at will. Amid the chaos, civilians witnessed events they had long dreamed of but also feared. French villagers woke to the sound of aircraft and gunfire. When they stepped outside, they saw the night sky filled with parachutes drifting down over their fields. Some cried with joy, realizing that liberation might be at hand. Others stayed silent, knowing the Germans would punish anyone suspected of helping the Allies. As fighting erupted in the streets and countryside, civilians faced difficult choices. Some guided paratroopers through the hedgerows, showing them hidden paths and safe houses. Others provided food, water, or information about German troop movements. These acts of resistance were dangerous. If discovered, entire families could be executed. For this reason, many villagers stayed indoors, praying that the battle would pass quickly. One farmer in a small village near St. Miraglise recalled later how he watched from his attic window as paratroopers fought German soldiers in his orchard. He could do nothing but hide his family and hope the shooting did not come through the walls of his house. In the morning, the ground was littered with spent shells, torn parachutes, and the bodies of men from both sides. For the civilians, the arrival of Allied troops was both hope and terror. Liberation meant freedom from occupation, but it also meant the destruction of their homes and the risk of German retaliation. Each decision had consequences. Some chose to act, guiding the paratroopers and helping them hold key positions. Others chose silence, waiting to see who would win before committing themselves. As dawn approached, the human cost of the night became clear. Paratroopers gathered in small groups, many exhausted and shaken by what they had seen. Some had lost friends in the flooded fields or in the first moments of combat. They spoke quietly, sharing fragments of their experiences as they prepared to continue the fight. German survivors retreated to regroup, their faces marked by shock and disbelief. They had been attacked in their own villages, often by enemies they never saw clearly. The confusion of the night left many uncertain of what was happening beyond their immediate area. For the villagers, the new day brought a mix of relief and dread. They had witnessed a battle unlike any they had ever imagined, fought in their fields and streets. Some greeted the paratroopers with cautious smiles, offering food or water. Others stayed hidden, waiting for the outcome before revealing where they stood. The human reaction to the airborne assault was as varied as the people involved. For the paratroopers, it was a test of courage and endurance. For the Germans, it was a shock that disrupted their sense of control. For the civilians, it was a moment of decision, one that would shape their lives long after the battle ended. As the first light of dawn broke over the Norman countryside, the scale of the night's events began to take shape. The scattered parachute drops, the isolated skirmishes, the frantic charges across bridges and through narrow lanes. These were not random acts of combat. Together, they formed a web of disruption that reached deep into the German defense system. The paratroopers had not simply landed to fight for their own survival. They had been sent to hold ground that the main invasion force would need within hours, and by sunrise, their efforts were already shaping the battles that would follow. At Utah Beach, the American landings began under far more favorable conditions than many had feared. The causeways leading inland from the flooded lowlands were still dangerous and narrow, but they were open. Paratroopers from the 101st Airborne had captured key points along these routes during the night. Without these causeways, tanks and heavy equipment would have been trapped on the beachhead, unable to move forward. By holding them, the airborne units ensured that the men storming the beaches would not be cut off or surrounded. This single factor made the difference between a successful landing and a possible disaster. Across the region, bridges that had been targets on the airborne mission maps were now in Allied hands. The seizure of Pegasus Bridge by British glider troops was one of the most critical actions. With that crossing secured, German forces east of the Orne River were effectively blocked from mounting a coordinated strike against the landing zones. Other bridges were destroyed with demolition charges to prevent German armor from crossing. These successes slowed enemy movement, forcing German units to take longer, more exposed routes and giving the Allies precious time to dig in. The effect on German reinforcements was immediate and damaging. Throughout the night, reports had poured into German headquarters. Some claimed large enemy forces were operating deep inland. Others suggested small raiding parties had landed to cause confusion. No one had a clear picture of what was happening. Telephone lines were silent where they had been cut. Radios carried only fragments of messages. The German command structure, already spread thin, struggled to respond. At the center of this storm of confusion was the question of when and where to commit the panzer divisions. These armored units were the only formations capable of throwing the Allies back into the sea, but they could not be moved without direct authorization from the highest level. Hitler held that authority, and he was asleep through much of the critical period. Senior officers hesitated to act without orders. By the time approval was given, Allied forces had already established beachheads that were growing stronger by the hour. The paratroopers' actions deepened the paralysis. Every bridge they held or road they blocked created delays. German armor that might have rolled straight to the beaches instead found itself stuck behind wrecked vehicles, blown craters, or ambushes from small Allied units. These scattered fights forced the Germans to spread their strength thin, reacting to multiple threats instead of concentrating for a single decisive counterattack. Even when German tanks finally began moving, they did so without coordination, arriving piecemeal and often too late. This breakdown of German response gave the Allies a vital window. As infantry and armor poured ashore, engineers worked to unload supplies and build up the landing zones. The beaches transformed from exposed strips of sand into fortified positions bristling with artillery and anti-tank guns. Once this buildup began, the chance to drive the Allies back was gone. The Germans could no longer destroy the invasion at its weakest point. The psychological impact was just as significant as the physical disruption. German troops who had fought during the night were shaken by the sudden appearance of enemy forces behind their lines. Many had faced relentless small unit attacks that seemed to come from every direction. Villagers spoke of parachutes filling the sky and Allied soldiers appearing out of the hedgerows without warning. These stories spread quickly, feeding a sense of panic. Commanders found it harder to rally their men or to trust reports coming in from the field. For the Allies, the success of the airborne operation proved the value of their bold strategy. The airborne troops had been scattered and bloodied, but they had achieved enough to tilt the balance of the battle. By dawn, they controlled key ground that would otherwise have taken days to capture. Their actions allowed the seaborne landings to proceed with far fewer losses than feared. Where the Germans had expected to meet the Allies on the beaches with overwhelming force, they instead found themselves delayed, divided, and unsure of where to strike. The opening hours of D-Day were always expected to be decisive. If the Germans could have concentrated their armor and reserves quickly, they might have driven the invasion back into the Channel. Instead, they hesitated, misjudged the situation, and lost precious time. The airborne assault played a central role in creating that hesitation. Every hour that passed allowed more Allied men and equipment to land, building strength for the coming push inland. By nightfall on June 6th, the Allies held firm positions along the Normandy coast. The beachheads were linked by supply lines guarded by the very paratroopers who had jumped into darkness the night before. German counterattacks came late and in fragmented waves, unable to achieve the mass needed to break through. The failure to mount a coordinated response on that first day was a blow from which the German defense never fully recovered. The success of the airborne mission went beyond its immediate tactical effects. It set the stage for the broader campaign that would follow. With the Normandy lodgment secure, the Allies could pour in reinforcements and launch operations to liberate the rest of France. German forces, already strained by the Eastern Front and Allied advances in Italy, were forced into a defensive posture they would never escape. The scattered paratroopers who had fought through the night had helped to crack open Hitler's fortress in the west. From the beaches to the hedgerows, the events of June 6th marked a turning point. The airborne assault disrupted the German defense at its core, ensuring that the massive amphibious landings could succeed. What began as isolated drops and small skirmishes rippled outward, shaping the course of the battle and, ultimately, the war itself. The night of June 6, 1944, left a mark far beyond the immediate battlefield. The airborne assault over Normandy became a case study in modern warfare. It showed that airborne forces, despite the chaos and high cost, could play a decisive role in a large campaign. Before Normandy, some commanders doubted the value of parachute troops. The drop zones were scattered, the men vulnerable, and the losses heavy. Yet by seizing key bridges, blocking roads, and delaying German reserves, the paratroopers proved that they could shape the course of a battle before the main force even arrived. In the months and years that followed, armies around the world studied the lessons of the Normandy airborne operation. The United States kept its airborne divisions active after the war. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, which had jumped into France, became permanent units, ready to deploy anywhere in the world. Other nations followed suit. Britain maintained its parachute regiment. Even countries outside the conflict, watching from a distance, began building their own airborne forces. These units would later see action in places far removed from the hedgerows of Normandy, from Korea and Vietnam to the Middle East and beyond. The equipment and tactics of airborne warfare also evolved. The gliders used at Normandy, though essential at the time, were fragile and dangerous. Many broke apart on landing, causing heavy casualties. After the war, most armies abandoned gliders in favor of helicopters and transport planes that could deliver troops and vehicles directly to the battlefield. The basic concept of vertical envelopment, the sudden appearance of troops deep behind enemy lines, remained the same, but technology gave commanders more reliable tools to carry it out. Normandy became a benchmark for this evolution, studied in detail by planners and soldiers alike. The human element of the airborne assault left a different kind of legacy. The images of paratroopers jumping into darkness, their parachutes glowing in the moonlight, became symbols of courage and sacrifice. Photographs and combat reports captured the drama of those hours. Over time, these stories spread far beyond the soldiers who lived them. Writers, historians, and filmmakers turned the events into narratives that reached millions of people. The public learned the names of units like the 101st Airborne, and individual soldiers became household figures. Books brought these accounts to life. Memoirs by veterans described the fear, confusion, and determination of the night drop. Histories written later placed those personal stories within the larger strategy of the invasion. Decades after the war, series like Band of Brothers retold the experiences of a single company of paratroopers, giving viewers a close view of the challenges they faced. Films such as The Longest Day and Saving Private Ryan recreated the sights and sounds of the airborne operation for new generations. While these works sometimes took liberties for dramatic effect, they kept the memory of the airborne troops alive in popular culture. These cultural depictions shaped how people understood the Normandy invasion. For many, the sight of paratroopers stepping out of a plane into the night sky became one of the defining images of World War II. It symbolized both the daring of the operation and the personal risks faced by each individual soldier. The image of a lone paratrooper, cut off behind enemy lines yet still fighting, came to represent the larger Allied effort to defeat Nazi Germany. In Normandy itself, the physical reminders of the airborne assault remained. Scattered across the countryside were the landing zones, the bridges fought over, and the villages that became battlegrounds. After the war, local communities and veterans organizations began to mark these places with memorials. Simple plaques and stone markers were placed at crossroads and bridges. Over time, larger monuments were built. Pegasus Bridge, where British glider troops had made their daring landing, became a site of pilgrimage for veterans and their families. Museums were established to preserve the artifacts of the operation, from uniforms and weapons to the wreckage of gliders. Every year on June 6th, people gather in Normandy to honor those who fought and died. These commemorations draw visitors from around the world. Veterans return to the places where they once fought, often accompanied by younger generations. French civilians who lived through the occupation stand alongside soldiers from countries that liberated them. The ceremonies are solemn, marked by silence, speeches, and the laying of wreaths. Overhead, modern aircraft sometimes perform flyovers, linking the present to the past. For the local population, the memory of that night remains deeply personal. Many families remember the paratroopers who landed in their fields or fought through their villages. Stories are passed down of acts of bravery and kindness, of soldiers sheltered in barns, of medics tending to wounded civilians, of villagers risking their lives to guide Allied troops through the hedgerows. These personal histories add depth to the broader military narrative. They remind us that the airborne assault was not just a maneuver on a map but a human event lived by thousands of individuals. The legacy of the Normandy airborne operation is also visible in the continued existence of the units that fought there. Modern paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions trace their lineage directly to the men who jumped on D-Day. Their insignia, traditions, and training reflect the experiences of those who came before. When these units deploy today, they carry with them the memory of Normandy, even if the battlefield looks very different. In this way, the past remains connected to the present, a living reminder of what airborne troops can achieve. Beyond the military sphere, the Normandy airborne operation serves as a reminder of coalition warfare. American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces worked together in an effort that required careful coordination. The success of the airborne assault depended on shared planning and mutual trust. This cooperation set a precedent for future alliances. Today, multinational exercises and operations often draw lessons from the joint effort at Normandy. As the decades have passed, the night of June 6, 1944, has moved from living memory to history. Fewer veterans remain to tell their stories in person. Yet the fields and villages of Normandy continue to speak. Visitors walk the same ground where paratroopers landed and fought. Museums and memorials stand as silent witnesses to what happened. Through them, the legacy endures, shaped by the actions of those who risked everything in a single night to open the way for liberation.